just want you by my side. Hypnotizing, tiny, staying up all night long. Just want you by my side. Hypnotizing, tiny, staying up all night long.
Greetings everyone. This took longer than anticipated to put together due to app and device issues along with IRL things, but it's finally starting. If you're familiar with the story but like me wish at times to listen to fix so you can enjoy it while being physically busy, I hope it brings you some peace of mind. If you don't know this fanfiction, be prepared for a wonderful time of detailed world building and character expansion. I personally recommend that you also go to the site to read the fanfic directly, as I personally think you get even more out of it from the humor and hints from the author's notes and the art they include to help with visualizing characters. In fact, they have a whole separate post dedicated as a character key to view all the original character arts, which you should also check out. It's really awesome. Deku-Sensei by BloomerBill. The summary is, early on in Izuku's first year of middle school, Inko discovered the extent of the bullying at Aldera and pulled him from public school to start online schooling. This led to a massive deviation from his previous path in life and becoming a prominent figure in the red light districts of the island. Let's see how UA handles their newest and youngest teacher. Before we begin, for those that care, this has a ship between Okuko and Shoji and a three-way ship between Mikogo and Tokoyami plus Dark Shadow in the future, which I think is great. Now on to the FIC. Chapter 1. Caught by chance. Midoriya Izuku has had a very difficult life, ever since he was 5 and was brought to a quirk specialist. It seemed that one bad thing after another once he was confirmed quirkless, but he did his best to keep his little head held high and see every moment as a teachable moment. When the doctor said he'd never develop a quirk, he was crushed at first. Then he looked into how heroes with non-physical quirks to see how they worked. When his father, Hisashi, stopped coming home after the diagnosis, Izuku cried every day for a month. But he did what he could to cheer up his heartbroken mother while trying to learn how to do things around the house like cooking and laundry so she wouldn't be as stressed out. When people started to ostracize him for his lack of a quirk and avoiding him, which made him feel lonely, Izuku spent all the free time he now had studying and adding to the notebooks he started using for hero analysis. When his best friend in the world, Kukin, started being mean and using his quirk on him, he felt sad, guilty, and often very hurt. That didn't stop Izuku from trying to stop Kukin from bullying others, and he would do his best to walk off the pain. When his classmates turned from ignoring him to physically bullying him, he lost count of how many times he limped home. But Izuku did his best to get through the day and patch himself up before his mother got home so she wouldn't worry or stress herself out over him. From all of these things, Izuku did his best to find something, anything, to take from them or some bright side to the experiences. From the doctor, Izuku learned he'd have to find a way to be a hero that wouldn't rely on a quirk, and discovered his favorite type of heroes and his favorite hobbies. Izuku tried not to think of the doctor's words or his mother's apology that he didn't want to hear repeating on loop. Of his father's abandonment, he learned many life skills before he was 10 that would be helpful later on in life while taking some of the burdens off of his mother. Izuku ignored the gaping hole in his chest when he heard his mother throw Hisashi out and pushed the nightmares of his mother abandoning him for not being useful or a burden as far as he could from his mind. The isolation of his peers gave him plenty of time to study and to work on his notebooks, and the adults ignoring him taught him to be independent. Izuku pretended not to notice how the teachers would purposely separate them or actively discourage them from playing with him because he was fragile, or how his teachers always forgot about him when they passed out field trip waivers or treats, so there was never enough. From Kukin's cruel words and consistent bullying, Izuku learned to grit his teeth and gained a thick skin when it came to insults. Izuku quickly understood how the hateful words constantly spewed at him were so much worse when they came from someone you loved than some stranger, and were stuck playing on loop in his mind no matter how much he tried to drown them out. From the bullying, Izuku learned to bear with the pain and treated his injuries on his own. Both would be a great skill for a hero. Izuku knew he shouldn't know how to stitch his body back together when his ears tore it apart, or knew when his classmates had or hadn't broken one of his bones, or be so familiar with the pain of forcing a limb back into its socket. For the next 7 years, Izuku had made a routine that had served him well. In the mornings he would wake up, get ready for the day, then have breakfast with his mom before heading to school. At school he'd do his best to keep his head down and avoid getting too injured from his classmates. During school hours, after school had ended, he'd try to run home to get away from his classmates, which he failed at 50% of the time, or he'd limp his way home if they already got to him. Occasionally he would see a few hero fights on the way home. When he got home, Izuku would clean himself up, then patch up his wounds before making dinner, then did his homework if he still had any, wait to eat, and talk with his mom. Occasionally they would do something together if he felt well enough to for an hour before retreating to his room. He'd finish any homework he had left, then would do his daily chores. The few times he had spare time left after all that before bed, Izuku would watch Hero 2 or research things so he could better understand how certain quirks work. All of this knowledge immediately was added to his notebooks. After that he double-checked his injuries would be okay for the night, then get ready for bed and passed out. On the weekends he'd use the large portion of his free time taking care of everything around the house he couldn't do the rest of the week, then take his notebooks to add to them and update, where he'd look into theories he had about the quirks he listed. When the occasion arose that his mom had the day off, they'd do something together, and maybe if the stars aligned, the two would enjoy a day out of the house. Today, however, was one of those days. He had just started middle school at Aldera, hoping that it would be better than the elementary school of the same name, and was sorely disappointed. Being in a different building and area, Izuku wasn't able to escape from Kuken's wrath. The blonde had caught him in a park, and he was subsequently beaten by Kuken and his lackeys. In addition to using their quirks on Izuku, they beat him, verbally abused him, dragged him through some bushes, and dumped him in a puddle of mud they made before leaving. Izuku waited until he knew they were gone to get to his feet and categorized his injuries, starting with any cut or bruises he could see so he could treat himself when he got home. His body ached, which was nothing new. He was as lightheaded and confused as he usually was after Kuken's beatings, and while he was able to stand this time, he noticed the shooting pain in his left ankle if he put weight on it. He was half sure his ankle was sprained. His ribs were probably bruised. And he knew his bottom lip was broken when he licked his dry lips and tasted copper in addition to mud. Izuku felt like a mess and was sure he looked like it too. His new middle school uniform now had tears, burns from Kuken's quirk, and money. Kuken had been a bit more heavy-handed this time and had actually burned him through his clothes with his quirk. Izuku was already mentally dreaded having to fix his new uniform on the first day, but he had thankfully predicted this and had stocked up on replacement cloth the week before. But he would need to get home, clean, and patch himself up first before he could think about fixing his uniform. Izuku stumbled when he took a step forward and collapsed to his knees with an oof before his face hit the ground. This, sadly, was not uncommon for the 11, soon to be 12-year-old, and he repeatedly tried to get to his feet only to fall over when he attempted to move forward. When he could solidly walk a few shaky steps, Izuku went to find his backpack, since it had gotten lost in the bushes, and started the trek home, doing his best to ignore the pain from his ankle. Kuken and his lackeys had taken up more time than normal. So while Izuku would still be home hours before his mom, he despaired the realization he wouldn't have time to treat his injuries, cover them up, and do his homework before making dinner. He sighed, resigned to the fact, and just tried to shuffle his way through the streets back to the apartment complex. Izuku had been relatively lucky on his way, only tripping 4 times, with only once from another person, and slipping 1 time while climbing the stairs. Once he finally got to his door and, not thinking clearly, he opened the door, then entered, planning on going straight to his room where his medical supplies were stashed away, but he stopped halfway. The door should not be unlocked. His mom shouldn't be home for 3 more hours, and she always locked the door behind her, and Izuku has had the only other house key for since he was 10. Concerns began to bubble up in Izuku's mind, overshadowing his current state. Asterisk, had mom accidentally left it unlocked? But she hasn't ever done that before because of her anxiety, and she always triple checks before leaving. Or what if someone broke in? We live in a quiet neighborhood, but break-ins could happen anywhere. What if they broke the door latch when they broke in? That would cost so much time and money to get new locks. Wait. Oh God, what if we were robbed? There was no way we could afford to replace everything, much less the damages to the wait. What was that sound? Oh go to God, there still her I am dash asterisk. Izuku's frenzied thoughts were caught off a soft, warm, familiar voice greeting him from the kitchen. Welcome home, Izuku. Did you have a great day at school? Izuku jumped, nearly falling over himself as confusion filled his head along with a new wave of panic. Mom, what are you doing? Home. He questioned, feeling his guts already knotting up as reasons why it's brought to the forefront of his mind. Asterisk, what day was it again? Monday? She should have been home by 8:30 today. Was she sent home early? Why would they do that? Did she start feeling unwell again? No, she got over that stomach bug already. She doesn't have any vacation days yet, so she couldn't have called off either, and she would have told me that beforehand. Then maybe she was in trouble at work? Why? Mom had a good relationship with her boss and she's a very good nurse. Did she get a new boss? Did they find out she has a quirkless son? Were they like his teachers? Did they fire her for having a quirkless child? Did she get fired because of me? Asterisk, Izuku's mental anguish hadn't lasted long as his downward spiral was interrupted by a soft giggle from his mother, Nishi. The new scheduling nurse overbooked my unit today. Aino didn't have as many overtime hours, so Aki sent me home. She answered, and Izuku immediately felt the weight of somehow getting his mother fired slip off his shoulders. You always work so hard. You do everything around the house. So, I thought that since I had the day off, I could surprise you with dinner this time. Inko cheerfully proclaimed, and Izuku couldn't help tearing up from her kindness. Words often couldn't describe just how grateful he was for such a wonderful mother. I made your favorite, she enthusiastically added, and he could even smell the katsudon from the doorway. Izuku's mouth watered, and he subconsciously licked his lips only for his heart to stop as the filthy taste of copper brought him back to reality. That he was standing in the entryway, a tattered mess covered in mud and blood, with his mother not 10 feet away from him. Izuku flew into an absolute panic when he heard her moving towards him. I am going to watch, she bugged as she stuttered out as he desperately rushed to his room, hoping by some miracle he could maybe get changed into something that could hide most of the damage, but he froze when a dull thud came behind him. He immediately turned around and saw his mom standing at the kitchen threshold with her hands over her mouth, staring at him horrified. Izuku felt his heart drop as one of his worst nightmares come true. Chapter 2. Pulling back the curtain. Izuku, what happened to you? Inko cried, the famous Midoriya, tears falling from her face as she rushed over to him. Izuku's body was trembling, only staying upright thanks to a hand firmly placed on the wall. Inko's eyes took in every inch of his bruised form. Massive patches of black, blue, green, yellow, and red overtook his skin, leaving little left of his pale skin. Sticks, twigs, and leaves stuck in his hair and his muddy uniform. The uniform in question wasn't just soaked in mud, torn in multiple places, revealing gashes and multiple hand-shaped scorch marks meeting where burnt skin and cloth nearly fused. Izuku's mind meanwhile was spiraling as he desperately grasped for an excuse that would calm her down. Fine. It looks doubly worse than it is. He sputtered out, but he flinched when she touched his heavily bruised cheek. Midoriya, Izuku, don't you dare try to tell me that. This is fine. She scolded him sternly and started pulling him to the bathroom. Izuku numbly followed along, mentally kicking himself for upsetting and worrying her while simultaneously trying to string together a fictional series of events that would reasonably explain his injuries. Asterisk, I can say the mud was from getting too close to a villain fight. Maybe I can also say some of the bruises were from flying debris. Oh, but wait, what if Mom thinks it's too dangerous for me to watch fights in person anymore, and that wouldn't explain the burns? I can't say anything about cooking. Don't say anything about cooking. Don't say anything about Kodesh. Asterisk, Izuku was torn from his thoughts when he felt the cold rim of the tub against the back of his legs. Then Inko gently ushered Izuku to sit there and quickly fetched the first aid kit from under the sink. Inko grabbed a wash rag as well, letting it get damp, then started to clean Izuku's face, softly asking, Izuku, tell me what happened. Panic came back, and Izuku's half-baked excuse fumbled its way out of his lips. It was an accident. But he was swiftly cut off. Izuku, Inko said firmly. Izuku opened his mouth to defend the lie, but stopped once he saw her teary eyes. Please, Inko pleaded, making Izuku's chest tighten painfully at how fragile her voice sounded. He felt the corners of his own eyes starting to prick up from unshed tears. Izuku wanted to spit excuses out until he convinced her nothing was wrong like he always did, but his brain refused to do anything other than stare at the utterly heartbreaking look on his mother's face. But he found himself incapable of lying like he usually would. He just simply couldn't lie to his mom to her face when she was looking at him like that. Instead, he felt like he was being hit by wave after wave of emotions that he had previously ignored or repressed for years, and that the mental dam that normally helped him keep from being drowned in said emotions burst, and he began sobbing. Words just falling out of his mouth as he told her everything: the bullying, the teachers that ignored him, the neglect from just about everyone, and even about what Kukin did to him. Once Izuku started talking, he just couldn't stop the words from coming until he was clinging to his mom, unable to speak and reduced to weeping. Inko was a rock during Izuku's breakdown, simply silently listening to him as she wiped away grit, cleaned the visible wounds, and pulling out the various things that had gotten stuck in his messy hair. She had also cried along with him until Izuku was just hiccuping in her arms. "Oh, Izuku, my poor baby," Inko whimpered as she wiped his tears, careful not to press too hard as she did. "You've been so brave, baby. You've been so strong, Izuku," she told him, rubbing his back, carefully minding his injuries. Inko gently brought Izuku's face up to look at her. "Izuku, do you think you can handle a car ride?" she asked. Izuku blinked and sniffed before he answered, I guess I think I could. W.Y. Inko stood and slowly helped Izuku to his feet. "Because I am taking you to the hospital," she replied, and Izuku nearly fell back into the tub. What? We don't have to do that. I'll be fine," he protested and would have argued more, but Inko fixed him with a look. "Izuku, you've been living with untreated wounds for years and who knows how many other injuries you've been hiding from me. We are going to the hospital now," Inko insisted. Izuku's eyes began to water again, and he was still going to protest, but Inko shook her head. "This is not a discussion, Izuku. We are going now," she told him, putting her foot down, and Izuku let his head hang. "Oh, okay," he muttered barely above a whisper. Inko quickly got together a change of clothes for him, then helped him limp to the car. Gil dated Izuku throughout the ride, and he began to apologize over and over again for being such a burden on his mom and how much money this was going to cost them. Inko did her best to comfort him as she drove and tried to assure him that he was the furthest thing from a burden. Inko got Izuku to be seen as soon as she could. Once they got to the hospital, he was brought to an examination room and left to change into a pair of scratchy scrubs. Afterward, he was carefully examined by the nurse with Inko for support while they waited for a doctor, but the nurse became very concerned when she found a gash on Izuku's leg he'd stitched up by himself a couple of days ago. Inko and the nurse were equally horrified to see the likely infected wound. Upon being seen by a doctor, Izuku was immediately admitted to the hospital to get the full scope of the severity of his injuries. When they questioned him how Izuku got so hurt, Izuku reflexively wanted to say it was just an accident, but Inko held his hand and helped him explain the bullying and abuse. They separated the two to confirm it, but once they ruled out domestic abuse, Inko was given permission to stay overnight with Izuku as they waited for the results of the multiple tests they had to run on Izuku. The testing time was shortened thanks to a nurse's x-ray work that let them confirm Izuku didn't have any broken bones. He did have 3 cracked ribs though, and many fractures all over his skeleton. It wasn't until midnight that they had a complete list of Izuku's medical problems. At that point, Izuku had secondary burns on his left shoulder, right side, back, and chest, with evidence of older burns in numerous areas, numerous lacerations both old and new all over his body, a black eye, broken nose, a split upper and lower lip, bloody scrapes on his knees, palms and chin, a severely twisted left ankle, multiple subcutaneous and intramuscular bruising spread throughout his body, old and new damage to his fingernails, symptoms of nitroglycerin poisoning though no traces of nitroglycerin in his body, an untreated bacterial infection from an improperly treated gash on the outer right calf, and most concerningly a confirmed TBI from primary blast damage. Given the various serious conditions, the Minryas would have to talk for a long time about Izuku's treatment for the more serious conditions. Eventually, that conversion came back to the bullying that left him laying on the medical bed in the first place, something which led to a further argument about what to do about it. It isn't Kukin's fault, he told her as they had gotten to what was the major issue at hand. Izuku's childhood friend. Inko's shoulders slumped and she had a morose look on her face. Inko tried to speak only to be cut off by Izuku. "Mom, it's not Kukin's fault. The teachers were supposed to stop him and make sure he didn't get out of control. They didn't, and let the others do whatever they wanted to me." And Izuku argued, tears welling up, but the argument was stopped when his mom put a hand on his shoulder. Now silent, he could hear the heart monitor he was connected to beating faster than it should have, and a glance showed his erratic heart rate. They both waited silently for it to calm down, with Inko gently rubbing the back of Izuku's hand as his body shook from the deep breaths he took to calm down. The doctor had warned them both about the dangers of stress in Izuku's state. It took some time given how worked up he accidentally had gotten, but once his heartbeat was back in the safe range, he took a deep breath, then turned to his mom. I know Kukensei can be a great hero. What he did to me was, and not good, but we can't tell anyone. Chide put a mark on his record, and he turned away from the hero schools. I don't want to be the reason he couldn't. Please mom, please. Izuku begged, the tears welling up in his eyes from before spilling down his cheeks. Inko felt her heart wrench at the sight of her son in such an awful state. Izuku, I can't just let him get away with what he's done to you. She protested, unwilling to just let this be dropped. That's not what I mean. I just don't want to be the reason he can't be a hero. Izuku clarified, and Inko sighed. All right Izuku, we won't report Katsuki, she told him, and the boy's relief was immediate and very visible. But I will be reporting Aldera for discrimination and abuse of power, she added, and immediately Izuku's relief was dashed. His mouth opened ready to protest, but Inko shot him a look. Izuku, if they treated you like this just because you were worthless, what's going to stop them from treating every worthless child like they did you? Inko asked, causing Izuku to get a very conflicted look on his face as he mentally debated it, and that made Inko's heart ache. As amazing as Inko knew her son was, she hadn't missed how selfless he was, or his lack of confidence, but considering the revelations of the last 24 hours, that selflessness had to have crossed the line to self-loathing at some point. Even if we were to ignore what they did to you, which we aren't, they are also hurting the rest of their students by giving them an unhealthy and dangerous view of the world. That if they are stronger than someone, they have the right to hurt them like they did by not stopping Katsuki. We can't just let them do that, okay? Inko elaborated further, and while Izuku still didn't seem happy about it, he accepted it and nodded. Oh okay, he muttered, rubbing his cheeks to get rid of his tears. Inko couldn't help feeling tears building up in her own eyes, as she could already see the uphill battle of getting Izuku to a better mindset was going to be more of a trek up a mountain. And mom, Izuku said, worry clear in his voice once he realized she was about to cry. Izuku, I've tried my best to be a good mother for you. However, it seems I've clearly failed in that. Inko told him. Her tone was rueful. Izuku was quick to jump to her defense, and no, you're a great mom. Why do you do so much for me? He argued, starting to cry again. Oh Izuku, you're far too kind. Inko replied, causing the boy to make a choked squeak, and Inko smiled sadly at him. I was so worried about teaching you to be kind that I must have forgotten to teach you the importance of respect, she said, and Izuku walked confused by her words. Izuku, I'm sure I've told you the same. Treat others how you wish to be treated, Inko mentioned, and Izuku nodded. He had always gone out of his way to help others. He took notes for his struggling classmates and slipped them into their bags when no one was looking, helping their neighbors with their chores even if they never asked, and Izuku had lost count of how many times he had stepped in to protect other students from being bullied, even if he was never thanked for it. But I think I should have told you a phrase my mother taught me to help with my anxiety. Never bend your head. Always hold it high. Look the world straight in the face, she told him. Izuku blinked, mentally going over the words, but ended up still being confused. But I think another one she taught me would be more fitting. Raise your standards to create change, she mused, making Izuku even more confused about what the two sayings had anything to do with their conversation. The second one means to raise the standard you expect of others, Inko softly explained, seeing his bafflement. The first is about how you let others treat you. Unintentionally sets a standard for how people are allowed to be treated, she continued. Izuku's face twisted as he tried to understand what she meant, but was unable to connect the dots. Why would look to him for how to treat people? What? He questioned, feeling dumb for not being able to understand. Izuku, do you think worthless children should be bullied? Inko asked, and Izuku shook his head. And no, he exclaimed. Then why was it okay for you to be bullied for being quirkless? Inko questioned. Izuku opened his mouth only to turn away as his hands fiddled with the blanket. That's different. He meekly protested, unable to look at her. Inko shook her head. No, it's not, Izuku. Either no one should be bullied, or everyone should. There's no middle ground when it comes to bullying, she argued, causing Izuku to shrink into himself more. Izuku, if they're only bullying you because you're quirkless, then they're going to bully everyone that's quirkless for being quirkless. If no one says that's wrong and even encourage it, then they're going to grow up thinking they have the right to hurt people just because they're worthless. Inko laid out plainly for him. Izuku seemed blown away by the thought and was trying to wrap his head around the idea. Seeing his heart rate picking up again, she took his trembling hands in hers. I know this is hard for you to understand right now, but you don't have to right away. It's something we'll work on, together. Inko promised, rubbing the back of his bandaged hands. Oh, okay. Izuku shakily agreed. Chapter 3, Misery Loves Company. Emotionally exhausted and physically tired, Izuku fell asleep rather quickly after their conversation. Inko stepped out to let him sleep as she got to work moving outside to make the phone calls she needed to. The first was to her boss explaining she'd be taking some of her hard-earned time off for a family matter. She called the Board of Education next, but given the time of night she didn't get anything but an answering machine. Inko left a strongly worded message that she wanted a meeting with them about her son's treatment in some of their schools. Her third call was to a small firm that helped with cases involving minorities. She had memorized their number once Izuku turned 6 and still hadn't shown any signs of a quirk. The fourth call was one she spent an hour arguing with herself whether or not to even make. Inko's brain flooded with things she wanted to say, things she wished to scream into the phone regardless of who might overhear her. But Inko didn't do any of that, and did her best to quiet the hateful part of herself. Then with a shaky breath pressed the call button. Inko waited with bated breath for the other to pick up and tried to think of what to say if they did. The quiet click before a tired voice answered was rather underwhelming considering her mental anguish. Inky, what the fuck are you doing calling me in the middle of the goddamn night? It's about 2 in the fucking morning. Inko, upon hearing Mitsuki's gravelly and slurred voice, Inko couldn't help tearing up. The weight of the situation finally allowed to start sinking in now that her son couldn't see her breaking down. Inky, Mitsuki quietly repeated, concerned and much more awake from not getting an answer. I am sorry, Mitsu-chan. I didn't mean to wake you. She apologized, voice shaking, all of her anger suddenly and quickly being disconnected from her friend. Hey, don't go spouting off BS, it's fine, Inky. What's going on? Mitsuki assured, and Inko had to hold herself back from sobbing. Izuku came home bleeding today. We're at H hospital right now, she managed to say as she wiped away tears. Fucking god, Inko, what the hell happened? Is the little guy okay? I'm getting dressed right the fuck now. Mitsuki panicky questioned with the sound of fabric moving around in the background. Inko swallowed thickly. He's going to stay in the hospital for a while. He is going to need a lot of treatment, she answered. Don't you worry about crap, Inky. I'm on my way. Where the fuck are you? I'm meeting you at the goddamn hospital, Mitsuki demanded. Before Inko could get herself together, there was some muttering on the other side of the phone, and judging from Mitsuki's yelling, Inko guessed Mitsu-chan had managed to wake Masaru. When Mitsuki stopped, Inko rattled off the hospital's address. Got it. I'll be there soon, so don't you worry about shit until I get there, Inky, Mitsuki promised, then quickly hung up before Inko could get another word in edgewise. Anxiety began to eat at her. Not moments later, and Inko went to the cafeteria to get a cup of tea to help calm her nerves as she waited for the blonde in the lobby. Inko was fairly worried Mitsuki might have broken a law or two when she stormed into the hospital not even half an hour after she hung up. The blonde was also clearly panicked and was a bit of a mess, her clothes having just been thrown on and having done nothing about her bedhead. Frantic red eyes met teary green ones across the room, and Mitsuki clearly didn't give a damn about social decency as she ran over to her. Inko, she cried, crushing the green at an egg. Bone-crushing hug. What the hell happened? Does he need surgery? Can we see little Izuku? Mitsuki questioned as soon as she pulled away with her hands on Inko's shoulders. Inko sniffled and rubbed away some of her tears. He fell asleep before I called him Mitsuchan, but we can see him if we're quiet, Inko answered pointedly, ignoring the other questions. Mitsuki had thankfully jumped at the offer and followed Inko up to Izuku's room. The blonde didn't make it 2 steps in before her hands flew up to cover her gaping mouth as she stared at the black and blue boy, utterly horrified. While most of Izuku was covered up his arms by a blanket, his neck was exposed, allowing anyone to see the hand-shaped bruises that wrapped around it, as well as part of one of the burns, in addition to multiple cuts along with other bruises on his arms as he laid limp on the hospital cot with a nose cannula and other devices connected to him. Thinking her friend had more than enough of a look, Inko led Mitsuki away from her battered son's room and to a table in the corner at the cafeteria. They were almost there when Mitsuki's shock and horror dissolved into a blind rage with steam practically pouring from her ears. To those bastards. How can anyone do that to Izuku? He's a sweet-ass brat that wouldn't hurt a fucking fly, who would dare lay a fucking hand on him. Mitsuki yelled, finally exploding when they were inside the room. Threads and strings of curses spilled from Mitsuki's mouth with little regard for those around them as Inko tried to corral her to a table away from prying ears. Almost there, Mitsuki rounded on Inko. Has he told you who the fuckers are? I don't care who those motherfuckers think they are. I've got lawyers, Inko. Mitsuki exclaimed loudly and clearly ready to go for blood. The dreaded question Inko had been afraid of since Mitsuki arrived made her hesitate in her steps. Mitsu-chan, please sit down. Inko requested, softly tugging Mitsuki towards the table. I swear when I get my hands on them, Mitsuki began to rant again, but Inko cut her off. Mitsuki, sit down, she told the blonde more sternly. The blonde's mouth shut, and she sat down looking at Inko a little startled. Inko took a seat next to her and let out a ragged sigh. Izuku told me who did it, she told her meekly, already resigned to the painfully conversion. Mitsuki jumped on the statement near immediately. Who? She demanded, practically spitting the word. Inko grimaced. It was his D-classmates. Inko answered. Mitsuki's mouth dropped open. What? Katsuki didn't say shit. There's no way he'd let them get away with that crap, Mitsuki exclaimed, looking baffled, and Inko's eyes focused on her empty cup of tea. He wouldn't, right? Mitsuki asked, losing a lot of her confidence when Inko hadn't said anything. Katsuki is the ringleader of his main bullies, Inko finally told her, causing Mitsuki to gasp. Her jaw dropped, and she automatically went into denial. There's no way that little shit would hurt Izuku. Sure, they had their fights, and the brat gives me shit whenever I ask about school, and Izuku hasn't come over in Y years, but that deviation I would have. Oh god, Mitsuki's words losing confidence. Inko grimly watched as things began to click in her friend's head, tears welling up as she slumped back into her seat as the reality of their son's fractured relationship fully sunk in. I am a horrible parent. How could I have missed this? Mitsuki whispered, tears falling, hair clutched tightly in her hands. Inko couldn't stop a mirthless laugh falling from her lips. If you're a horrible parent, I must be so bad at parenting I shouldn't be called a parent, Mitsu-chan. She said, me bullshit? The fuck you are. Mitsuki protested immediately, but Inko leveled her with a look. I'm a nurse and I didn't notice my own son coming home bleeding and blown up. I think that's a bit worse, Mitsu-chan. Inko countered with a forced Wally smile, tears pouring down her face again as her body trembled. The two sat silently, unable to find words as they cried over their sons. What's wrong with Izuku? Mitsuki asked once she regained her voice. Inko wilted and started picking at the rim of her empty cup. He's got a lot of cuts and bruises like you saw, cracked ribs, a bacterial infection, maybe a sepsis, symptoms of nitroglycerin poisoning, but we're most concerned about the TTBI. Inko listed off, straying away from using the bigger, scarier terms, but Mitsuki didn't look any less horrified or guilty. The fuck is the TBI? Mitsuki asked, voice quieter than Inko had heard her friend in years. It stands for traumatic brain injury. It's from primary blast damage. Inko explained, a bit disconnected from the conversation. Katsuki used his fucking quirk on Izuku. Mitsuki questioned, face pale, and Inko grimly nodded. That's where he got the burns and nitroglycerin poisoning, Mitsu-chan. She confirmed. Mitsuki's shoulders slumped as if she had strings keeping them up and that they had been cut. How could this crap happen, Inko? Is little Izuku going to be okay? Mitsuki questioned, running a hand through her hair, trying to find something to reassure her frayed nerves. The hospital is going to keep him for 2 weeks at least, to treat and monitor him in case of further complications. Once he's released, Izuku will have to do months of rehabilitation therapy and regular therapy for the bullying. Inko explained, rubbing the back of her hand. I am not sure if we can pay for it all, Inko muttered, still trying to figure out how to keep in the black while paying for the treatments, medicine, and therapy. I'll pay for it, Mitsuki said, catching Inko off guard. What? Inko questioned, turning to look at the blonde. My bastard child is the reason Izuku is in the hospital. The least I can do is make sure he gets proper treatment after all the bullshit the brat put him through. Mitsuki clarified, face having regained some of its color and glaring at her hands now on the table. Mitsu-chan, why you don't have dash? Inko tried to argue. No, Inko, I'm going to pay for it, all of it. The hospital bills, prescriptions, rehabilitation sessions, all of it, Inko. Mitsuki firmly told the brunette, then sighed, rubbing her forehead. Besides, whatever bloodthirsty lawyer you get is probably going to ask for it anyway, when you fucking start suing. She added offhandedly, and Inko's grip on the cup got tighter. Izuku doesn't want to sue anyone. Inko corrected, much to the blonde's shock. The fuck? Why the hell not? Those little gremlins might rat put him in the godforsaken hospital and God knows what the fuck else. Mitsuki questioned, a small bit of outrage fueling her tone. Inko gave another wobbly smile and a breathless laugh. He doesn't want to ruin anyone's future. He doesn't want to be the reason they couldn't achieve their dreams. She explained. That's bullshit. Are you really not going to charge their sorry asses, Inko? Mitsuki asked, personal scorn of the situation causing her to be protective over her beloved godson. Inko wanted to say she was that. She'd hang them by their ears, but just let her head hang instead. No, Mitsu-chan, it simply wouldn't be worth the legal fees. Inko bluntly answered, fuck that. I told you I've got lawyers, Inko. If money is a problem, I'll fucking pay to see those shitheads behind bars. Mitsuki offered, and Inko sighed amid such an I wish it was that easy, but the money isn't the problem, she told, her tears welling up again. What happens after the lawsuit? Izuku could never walk down the street without everyone knowing he's worthless, without everyone knowing what happened to him. It was so hard trying to find a school that would take him as it was, but if we went to court, she'd never take him with a lawsuit on his record. He'd be turned away because they'd be afraid of a lawsuit against them. People already turned him away just for being worthless because they don't want to deal with him getting hurt under their care. Inko broke down into sobs midway through her rant. Mitsuki pulled her into a hug and tried to comfort her dear friend, even though there wasn't much the blonde could do for the brunette. I'm sorry, Inki. I don't know what to do. Mitsuki confessed, emotionally torn. Inko sighed shakily as she wiped her face. I don't either, Mitsu-chan, but Izuku can't go back. He can't go back to that place. Inko said with her body shaking from nerves and anger, but I don't know where we could find a new school. Aldera was the only school in the district that would take him and not deny us tuition. Inko continued, venting a bit unintentionally. Don't they offer online courses for dumbass that can't go into school buildings? Maybe little Izuku can do one of those shitty scams. Mitsuki suggested, and for a minute Inko paused, then smiled brightly. That's it. Oh, Mitsu-chan, it's the perfect idea. She exclaimed, hugging the blonde. Inko immediately took out her phone and started to look up online schooling, mumbling of different things she wanted and how legitimate they might be. I'm going to go back home to tell Moss at the Fox going on. I didn't tell him much before I ran out. Do you want me to swing by your rat hole to get you guys anything? Like clothes or some shit? Mitsuki offered, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe away her tears. Inko blinked, then her mouth opened in an O-shaped eye. I rushed to the hospital because of Izuku's condition. I wasn't able to grab anything but a change of clothes for Izuku. Inko confessed, a little ashamed. Right. Don't worry your little bobblehead about anything, Inki. I'll take care of this crap. Mitsuki promised, standing up. Inko was quick to jump to her feet and hugged Mitsuki tightly. Thank you for coming, Mitsu-chan. Inko muttered quietly. The entire situation had been emotionally taxing, and she had truly needed the comfort of her closest friend. Of course, I would, you inky little bitch. Mitsuki replied automatically, aggressively hugging her back, and Inko began bawling. You've been so good to us at mid-session, she exclaimed, burying her face into Mitsuki's thigh. Mitsuki would normally brush the praise off with a smirk, but after everything she learned tonight, she felt more guilty hearing the words instead of pride. It's nothing, Inki. See you in an hour or two. Mitsuki muttered, patting Inko's back, then left with Inko seeing her out before, then returned to Izuku's room and continued her research of online schooling. Chapter 4. Hard Conversations. Mitsuki's grip on the steering wheel caused her knuckles to turn white, and she was trying her best to not pull the car over and snap at the asshole behind her that kept honking like the fucking bastard he was. Mitsuki was never any good dealing with emotions, and she was never going to claim otherwise, so learning the truth of her son's behavior towards little Izuku was worse than a punch to the gut, and she had never felt so torn apart emotionally and mentally. Katsuki was her hard-working little brat, who had a massive ego despite her best efforts, but she always loved him as any decent mother would. but here she was coming home at 3 in the morning from visiting some of the most important people to her, and one of them was in the hospital with the other crying at his bedside because of him. Mitsuki wasn't sure if there were enough words to describe her emotions right now, and she was only really able to pick out the biggest ones bubbling to the surface when it came to her son's actions. Sorrow that she had become so disconnected from the people she loved that her son could do such awful things right under her nose without her knowing. Horrified that her son could hurt anyone like that or use his work on anyone, much less Izuku. Confused on how the boy who always proclaimed he'd be the #1 hero could become a ringleader of bullies. So incredibly disappointed that her brat had sunk so low. The most familiar was probably the anger that her brat could ever raise a single hand to hurt anyone, much less repeatedly attacking little Izuku. Guilt had begun eating away at her in the hospital once Inko told her Katsuki was the one to put Izuku in the hospital. She could hardly look Inko in the eyes afterward, and tears pricked Mitsuki's eyes at the thought of what the Midoriyas would have to go through. Anger swelled and crawled under her skin, creeping all over her body, making her physically shake when she remembered that the brats that hurt Izuku would get off free without even getting a him slap on the wrist for those cocksuckers. But knowing what she knew now, other thoughts began to plague Mitsuki's mind. Izuku was such a sweet open brat, happy to speak his mind to anyone that would listen, that grew into more of an anxious wallflower nerd like Inko. She just assumed that Izuku was becoming more like his mother since she was the only one taking care of him. God knows Katsuki was also the spitting image of herself. But how much did she actually know about her sweet-ass little godson? Was he really as much of an introvert as Inko, or had he purposely closed himself off from people because he was afraid to open up to anyone more? Did he have anxiety like his mom, or was he justifiably paranoid that her son would beat him black and blue for moving even a hair out of place? Was Izuku really shy, or was he terrified that everyone would turn on him the second he opened his mouth? These thoughts made Mitsuki's guts twist in ways they hadn't since middle school, as every interaction was dragged back from her mind in vivid detail, with every possible red flag being tauntingly waved in her face. She bit her lip, unable to stop herself from comparing her own behavior to Izuku's, and unable to keep from cursing herself out for not seeing it earlier. Mitsuki had tried to calm herself down on the ride back to her apartment, but she still found herself trembling as she got out of her car. Masaru was already waiting anxiously for her in a robe with a pot of tea. He was so lost in thought he hadn't noticed her until she closed the door, which was when his head snapped towards her. What happened? Masaru asked, cutting straight to the point, having become quite concerned at the sight of his quiet, trembling spitfire of a wife crying in the doorway. Something that was so out of character for her that it was probably a scary thing for him. Mitsuki's mouth opened a few times, but it took a full minute for her to find words. Izuku was in the goddamn hospital. Some motherfucking cocksucking bigots attacked him on the way home from that shitty school yesterday. Mitsuki told him, surprised she could keep herself from yelling as she explained. Masaru hadn't needed any more explanation. He understood her source of distress and quickly crossed the room to put his hands on her shoulders to help ground her. Mitsuki felt the anger dissipate slightly as she was reminded of how good of a partner Masaru was. Masaru was always sweet but straightforward in the way she needed. Is he going to be okay? Masaru asked, gently rubbing circles into her shoulders. He's stable right now, but he was in bad shape. Ain't going to get out of the hospital for a while, and then he'll need rehabilitation therapy or some shit, Masa. Mitsuki answered, wiping away tears. Masaru was about to say something when Katsuki groggily stomped into the living room, rubbing his eyes. It's 4 in the fucking morning. The fuck are you geezers doing? Katsuki hissed, glaring at them. A new wave of anger and guilt overwhelmed Mitsuki when she saw the boy. The urge to scream profanity at the boy for sleeping so damn soundly after putting little Izuku in the hospital. It was only held back through clenched teeth. Katsuki, Masaru said in a warning tone, shooting the boy. Look, Katsuki tched, and rolled his eyes. Christ, old man, you sound like someone died or some bullshit. The boy complained, crossing his arms. Masaru was about to scold the boy, especially given his poor choice of words, but his wife spoke up first. Go to your room, she coldly hissed, barely above a whisper. The two blinked, shocked, both getting confused by her quiet outburst, especially Katsuki. Having never seen his mother like this, why the fuck would I do that, hack? Katsuki shouted. Mitsuki turned and glared daggers at him. Katsuki, go to your room now. You are grounded. Mitsuki hissed, her voice lowering to a tone Masaru had only heard his wife use a few times before. The harshness of it made Katsuki flinch back. He had never heard his mother speak like this ever. The fuck? I haven't done shit, she protested, but Mitsuki pushed away from Masaru and stomped straight up to the boy, and she practically snarled into his face. Go to your room now. Katsuki stared back up at her wide-eyed, finding he had been stripped of his voice in his shock and it was unable to return under the sheer venom in Mitsuki's eyes. Katsuki hesitantly stepped back, then he slowly backed away and retreated to his room without a word. Mitsuki had to stop herself from following her son to further give him a piece of her mind. Her fists clenched so tightly as they shook from her flaring rage. Mitsuki, Masaru meekly said, placing a hand on her shoulder. Clearly concerned from the sudden act of aggression, Masaru had seen her blown up before and had even had some of her fits directed at him, but Mitsuki had never once snapped at their son being so careful before, having personally removed herself if she ever felt she was getting overwhelmed. Mitsuki could feel the anger die on her tongue upon seeing Masaru so confused, worried, and a little scared. She hated this, and the fact that she was the reason he was making that face and that she had scared her son made guilt and shame fled her body, cooling the rest of the excessive anger in her. We need to talk, Mitsuki told him, tears falling from her face, forcing her hands to unclench. Let's take care of your hands first, Masaru muttered, gently taking Mitsuki's wrists. Her fingernails had pierced her palms and they were bleeding now. Oh, okay, she whispered. Masaru disinfected the wounds and bandaged Mitsuki's hands before they both sat down on the couch. Mitsuki needed a few minutes to collect herself before she explained everything she had learned about at the hospital from Inko. There was a very serious talk between the two that lasted until the sun rose. Chapter 5. The day after Izuku had woken up to his mother's muttering, and he thought nothing of it before snuggling deeper into his blankets, only to pause when he felt something inside his nose tug. When he did, and it confused him until the memories of what happened before he fell asleep came back to him. Izuku choked and immediately sat up, seeing he was in scrubs on a hospital bed. Looking around, he saw his mom sitting beside his bed looking over some papers, but he must have startled her when he woke up. Oh, good morning, Izuku. I didn't wake you up, did I? Oh, Izuku, I'm so sorry. Inko apologized and Izuku was quick to correct her. And no, Mom, you didn't, I swear. What are you doing? He asked to change the topic up. A nurse was kind enough to have the treatment options printed out for us to go so we can figure out what would be best for you, Inko explained, walking over and gave him a couple of the papers she was holding. Izuku took them and read them over, but most of it was really just gibberish to him, and he even couldn't pronounce some of the words. We're going to have to figure out a schedule for when you return home, Inko mused, brushing his stray hair behind her ear and looking through the papers for something. Keeping a strict schedule will be very important for your TBI recovery, she informed him matter-of-factly, and Izuku nodded along with her, not quite comprehending what a TBI meant. Izuku didn't understand a lot of the medical terms or words, but he had tried to learn something about medicine initially for his mom so they could talk about her job more. What he had learned had mostly kept him from dying from an infection, and maybe he did push himself a bit too far sometimes, but even he understood how important it was to take it easy when bones were broken. Even if he hadn't, the doctor had stressed that further stressing his body could lead to permanent injuries and or disabilities, and Izuku wouldn't risk becoming even more of a burden than he already was. Looking down at the papers he still couldn't read. See, could you explain these to me? Izuku requested, turning to his mom. Inko nodded and flipped to the first page and started to go over all of them and explained each page of treatments, therapies, and possible exercises to help him rebuild muscle tissue when it was time to start the rehabilitation part of his recovery. Naturally, as they usually do, they went on a bit of a tangent, and the Midoriyas eventually got on the topic of whether it would be worth it to buy personal special exercise equipment or if they could make do with regular equipment. Their talk was briefly interrupted by a nurse checking on Izuku, his machines, changing the bags on his IOP, as well as checking his nasal cannula was safely hooked up. Briefly checked Izuku's vitals. Izuku had been allowed to ask the nurse a few questions about his work before he continued with his rounds. They didn't get right back into the conversation when he left, as the nurse had also brought food for Izuku. When they did, Inko had gently brought up the idea of switching to an online school, and Izuku was very agreeable to the prospect, much to Inko's relief. Happy to skip the part of convincing Izuku into switching from Aldera, and she happily showed Izuku the sites she had spent all last night researching when there was a familiar rough knocking at the door. Yes, Inko called and the door opened to reveal Mitsuki with a duffel bag. The blonde looked the room over before entering fully. Hey Inky, I brought you an overnight bag. How are you doing, Izuku? Mitsuki asked, walking over to the pair and dumping the bag by the end of the bed. A little sore, Auntie Mitsu-chan, but I'm fine, really. Izuku answered, brightening up upon seeing his aunt. The Bakugo family would always be family to Izuku. Kugen's behavior aside, the Bakugo family had always held a kindness most didn't or stopped showing him once they learned he was worthless. Kugen hadn't been the kindest, but his parents still welcomed Izuku with open arms and the old Bakugo charm. Mitsuki flinched seeing Izuku smile aimed at her, especially given his state. She hesitantly raised a hand to very carefully ruffle Izuku's mess of curls, being careful not to disturb the bandages keeping his eye patch in place. Izuku practically beamed like the sun up at her tea. That's great, Izuku. Why don't I stay and visit you so your mom can go home to your hole in the wall to shower and shit? Mitsuki suggested, glancing at the bags under Inko's eyes made the blonde severely doubt the woman slept after she left. Not that she was much better. Inko straightened up when Mitsuki brought her up and immediately began waving her hands. Oh Mitsu-chan, you don't have to do that. She protested, but the blonde glared and bopped her on the head. Sure as shit I do, Inky. You ain't going to be in the proper mind to sign medical bullshit if you don't fuck off to Dreamland. Mitsuki argued, then got Inko to her feet and out the door before she could form a proper response, making Izuku's stomach drop. With the buffer of his mother being gone, Izuku felt his ever-present anxiety worm its way under his skin. One of the reasons Izuku stopped going over to the Bakugas on his own was because there just wasn't anything they could talk about anymore. The lion's share of topics was completely forbidden, considering the only ones he could talk about at length were heroes, school, and quirk analysis. School was obviously thrown out the moment it came up because of the bullying alone, and he deflected as much as he could. Talking about heroes would make Kugen angry, and they'd probably make fun of how much a hero fanboy he was. His quirk analysis made everyone think he was creepy, and he'd lose people whenever he tries to talk about it. With how socially stunted he was, Izuku had no idea how to even begin talking about anything else, so it was safe to say Izuku had no idea what to do now that he was alone with his aunt in his hospital room. Izuku bit his lip and fiddled with his blanket. Asterisk, of course, Mom told Auntie Mitsu-chan about what happened. Does she know why I'm here? Maybe Mom hasn't told her about the bullying yet? But what if she does know? Does she know about Kugen? Oh god, what if she does? Does Uncle Masa-chan know too? Is Kugen going to get in trouble because of me? Kugen will be so mad at me for spilling to his parents. Worthless, stupid, shitty Deku. You can't do anything right. Useless, worthless piece of shit. Go die in A-. Izuku was pulled from his thoughts before he could be drowned in his internal mental panic by a bright red box being waved in front of his face by Earth to the bush. He asked, I'm pretty sure those stuck-up Chris's haven't let you do anything remotely fun since you were admitted. That's why I took the liberty of bringing this fucker for you, Izuku. Mitsuki told him, offering the box to him. Thank you, Auntie Mitsu-chan. Izuku said, overjoyed by the unexpected gift and something to focus on other than his situation. Oblivious to Mitsuki's wince as he took the box, he examined the box and nearly squealed when he realized what his present was. A hero-themed puzzle box, and he excitedly examined the picture of Gang Orko with some of his sidekicks. All the facts he knew of the hero floating to the surface and pouring out of his mouth in the form of muttering. He froze when he felt a hand in his hair and looked up to Mitsuki, giving him a sad smile. Then he realized what he had done and looked away, ashamed of himself. Wait, don't stop on my account, brat. I want to hear more about that shitty sea panda. Mitsuki prompted, giving him a gentle nudge. Izuku hesitantly began stuttering out facts he knew of the hero and his sidekicks as they began building the puzzle with his aunt encouraging him. A conversation about their costumes led to the two talking about the pros and cons of each one, and Izuku was pleasantly surprised his aunt knew so much about costume design. But Mitsuki just told him fashion design does have some crossover with costume design. That led to the two talking about fashion in general, but mostly Masaru's new line she was modeling that was more sports-oriented. Her job in fashion was why she knew these costumes were kind of shitty. Izuku eagerly held onto her every word, having not put much thought of this part of heroics before, and knew most of what she was mentioning would be useful knowledge. That's the end of these chapters. Thanks for listening. Leave a green heart and hospital emoji for our dear broccoli boy. Also, don't forget to check out BloomerBill directly for the extra content I mentioned before. See you next time. Bye 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 bye.
I could tell by your eyes you've got some